Permissions and access. Go ahead and watch this video from AWS, and once you're ready, you can continue on this one. Again, these videos are in the slides. All right, so our first service that's going to help us manage permissions and access is, of course, the Identity and Access Management service, one that we're sort of familiar with, right? We did some IAM management at the beginning of the class. Because as we've discussed, right, you usually don't use the root user. We'll talk about why in this lesson. But yeah, IAM is a service that helps securely manage access to AWS resources by defining who. You can do that through users, groups, and roles. Can access what? And those would be your AWS services and resources. And then there's the how, right? You can do that via permissions, policies, authentication methods. We'll talk about that all in this lesson. So IAM gives you the flexibility to configure access based on your company's specific operational and security needs. If you're a software company, you might have database roles, developer roles, just such as I was myself, right, at a company. You might have IT roles. You can give certain permissions to each of those roles to the capacity that makes sense for your organization, right? For example, if I am a junior developer, right, and I'm working on, additions and updates to the software, I shouldn't have free access, right, to production code, for example, or production instances on the cloud. If I am simply a security auditor, right, maybe I shouldn't have the ability, right, to add new things to the software, right? Because I'm not a developer as a security officer at the company. So different roles, right, will need different permissions. So you do this by a combination of IAM features, which we're going to explore in detail. So let's see. It's got a duplicate. There we go. Sorry, a little bit of a lag there. So here are some of the IAM features we'll be discussing. You'll actually get some firsthand experience through the lab for this lesson. So IAM users, so those are individual identities. Those represent people, right? Users in your company, organization. There's groups, so that's a collection of users. Really useful if you want to assign permissions to multiple users at once. There's IAM roles, so those are temporary permissions. We'll talk about that in greater detail in some of the following slides. Policies, so that's how you actually define the permissions, right? So if you want to give a certain permission, then you can use specific either custom policies, or even they have policy templates in AWS that you can kind of just drag and drop onto users and groups. And then there's MFA, which something we're all probably familiar with at this point. Is adding a little extra layer of security when you're authenticating yourself as an IAM user. We'll talk about that though in greater detail. So first of all is the root user, right? A lot of you have probably been logging into your AWS account as a root user to complete a lot of the labs. If you're in an actual organization, I probably mentioned this in that first lab after setting up, right, your AWS account, that you typically don't sign in as a root user, right? If you're in a real organization. And the reason why is because it has full administrative access to all the services and resources with no restrictions. That, with great power, great responsibility, can be dangerous, right? You can mess things up. You have to be really careful, right? If you can do anything without any restrictions. Again, that can mean shutting off instances, and that could potentially, right, affect your website and create downtime for your customers, right? If they want to shop on your website, for example, you don't want to give every single person in your organization, the ability to do that. Something bad can happen if it can happen, right? If it is possible for it to happen. So the less of these scenarios that you allow through your policies, right, through your IAM, the better. So root user access, usually not a good idea. You don't want to just give everybody in your organization the root user account and password, right? That'd be a huge security issue. So the root user is accessed by signing in with the email address and password that you used to originally create the account. Think of the root user as the owner of the coffee shop, right? There's only one owner, right? Not everybody should have those permissions and abilities. All right, let's see. Sorry, a little bit of a lag. There we go. All right, so root user. So when you create an account, this establishes your root user identity. And then when you create your first IAM user, you can provide specific permissions. By default, your first IAM user will have no permissions, as we'll discuss. And then typically, right, you log in as the IAM user. You can certainly give your IAM user full access, give them like administrative access, if that's what the situation requires. And even that's better than logging in as root. It's just going to make sure that there's a distinguishing, right, of roles of people. And you're not sharing accounts. That's another thing we're going to discuss. It's not a good idea to be sharing different accounts between people in your organization. You should have an IAM user for every person in your account. Even the owner of the coffee shop, right, should have their own IAM user. And if you want to give them root permissions, then explicitly do that, right, through the policies. So only access the user for a limited number of tasks. One of those tasks is actually adding new users, right? That's a great use of the root user. So it's best practice to not use the root user for everyday tasks. Best practices, right? Those are just industry standards, things that you should do. You don't have to do it, but it's definitely things you should follow, right? If you want to do things in the way that everyone else is doing to keep things secure. So instead, use the root user to create your first IAM user and assign it permissions to create other users. Then continue to create other IAM users and access those identities for performing regular tasks throughout AWS. Only use the root user when you need to perform a limited number of tasks. Again, such as adding new users, right? Chicken before the egg. You can't add an IAM user unless you first log in as the root user. From there, then, of course, you can just exclusively use your IAM user. For more tasks, for more information on those tasks that require root user credentials, you definitely check out this guide. Not required though. All right, so IAM users. What is an IAM user? It's an identity created with an AWS identity and access management within the service, right, to represent an individual or application that needs access to AWS resources. So it's not just for people. If you have a service talking to another service, you can also create an IAM user for that service. It's entirely possible, right? So it's not always actual humans. It could be other, applications or software, etc. So by default, when you create a new IAM user, it has no permissions set up. So it's not going to be able to do anything. You actually have to go in there and assign specific permissions. You have to grant that IAM user the necessary permissions. Let's see. So the best practice is to create an IAM user for each person in your organization who needs access to AWS. Do not have people sharing accounts, right? That's a huge security vulnerability. Let's say you have 10 people using the same account, and then in the security logs, you found that that person was doing some, malicious activity or maybe making some mistakes. It'd be really difficult to identify which of those 10 people, right, were responsible for that vulnerability. Now, if you have one account per person, then you can directly see, right, who did what. Oh, this person accidentally messed up the test instance, right, and that's why it went down. So yeah, it's always best practice to not be sharing accounts across multiple individuals and users.